Hello, I am so excited to welcome you to the show, Beth. It is amazing to have you here and to connect in this way.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Amy. I'm so honored to be on your show.
Yeah, it's so fun when we meet in different capacities or different experiences. Beth and I met during a mastermind experience together, and I feel like whenever you're in a growth experience together, there is a unique connection where you get to see each other in a different light. And so I'm really grateful to have learned from you and to have been in space with you as we were in that mastermind experience. And now I'm excited to share your gifts with my community.
Oh, thank you so much. I agree. Feelings are mutual.
Amazing. So I'd love to start by talking about what brought you here to being a spiritual business coach. I know that you do a lot of different things and have a lot of different modalities and tools that you use. And I think it's always nice to really just drop in and hear about what it is that brought you to this work.
Yeah, I often tell the story of how I became a business coach totally by accident, which, it's like that divine guidance, I guess. So when I was a little kid, I was a natural entrepreneur. And I know that sounds so cliche, but I grew up in suburban Bay Area, California, and lived in a very suburban street with, houses all next to each other. And my best friend and I used to set up all these shops and pretend that we were these high-powered business women flying all over the world, and we used to sell things on the street. And I always knew I was cut out for entrepreneurship. But fast forward to high school, pre-college, I come from a very typical American family who is you go to college, you get a job, and you stay there forever until you die. And that's kind of what I was taught. And it was really interesting because that was my programming, but I knew in my body and my heart that I was meant to be an entrepreneur. I just didn't know what it was. So out of college, when I started or right before college, actually, before it ended, when I started interviewing for my first corporate career jobs, they would ask me, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? I don't know if people remember that old school question. And I used to say, well, I want to own my own business. And someone in human resources at one of these jobs actually said to me, you shouldn't say that on these interviews because, this again, like this is in the 90s, not even that long ago, it was only late 90s. And, they told me not to say that because it would deter them from hiring me. And I was like, what? So I took jobs, I was in corporate America for about 15 years. And the whole time I knew that I was still meant to have a business or at least be part of a business. When I was younger, I used to say that I saw myself as second, like the person behind the business, like, second in line, not maybe the owner, but the person helping the business grow. And I used to say this at a pretty young age. And it wasn't until, I was living in New York City for a very long time, and I took up running. Like I was always an athlete growing up, and it kind of died out for a while. And I took up running because it became one of the only social activities that didn't involve drinking alcohol. Because, New York City is known for just people going out and getting wasted all the time. And as I took up running, I got really into the running community and running marathons and ultra marathons and very entrenched in this running culture. And back then I was also working in fashion, doing apparel product development. And very early on, I started noticing, and this was like a while ago, the running clothes at the time were not made for cool urban women like me. They were kind of designed for men, and pretty much men only, and women were very secondary. So I started thinking about this idea of beginning a running apparel company because I hated the way everything fit. Nothing was actually like cute enough to like go out afterwards. We used to like not want to be seen in our running clothes. So especially being, a young hip woman in New York City, you want to look good too. And this was kind of like pre Lululemon's blow up, like back in those days. So I had started thinking about this, and long story short, after many years of in the garment apparel, like fashion industry, working for like a big designer, a series of events happened. Like my father died prematurely, and I was laid off from a job, and I took time off to kind of rethink life and travel. And it's kind of, that was about like 2011 when I was like, I know I'm here for something more. And it kind of, got to this point of, if I don't follow this dream and at least try it, it's going to eat my soul alive, because it was eating me, like eating my heart. So within a year, I had actually shifted my career to go work for early stage tech startups, which was much more aligned with who I was. Like, a lot more freedom to be who you were and take charge. And it was these smaller companies where I had bigger roles of like growing their business. So I was already helping these early stage tech startups grow, because some of these places only had like 5 employees or 10 employees. And then I had started to work on this running apparel business. And I originally was like, what, I'll just do it as a project, like for fun, and see what happens. And so I took this attitude of like, it didn't matter if I made money, and I just had to do it. And I put it out there, and it was interesting. It kind of launched and got some press, like right when some of these tech companies I was working for couldn't afford me anymore. So I actually gave it a try for a few years and ran it. And it turned out like somewhat successful. Like I didn't make millions, but it got some notoriety, and, like I had like a mini cult following. But during that time of when I was working for the early stage startups and starting up my business, and during those years of running my business, people would come to me like excessively asking me to help them, like, hey, can I have coffee with you? And, can you tell me how you started your business? And this was going on, like, it was getting really excessive. It was going on all the time, like strangers even like, PMing me on LinkedIn, like, hey, can I take you out for coffee, or can we do a phone call? And over that time period, I even started noticing, I'm like, why does everybody want my help starting their business? Like, why can't they figure it out on their own? And because to me, it actually came very naturally, because I had actually been doing this even in corporate as well. And so then I started noticing all the signs. And at the time, I was going through a really deep spiritual awakening as well. Like I've always been on a pretty deep path since I was very young, like as a teenager. But I started noticing all the different signs. Like friends of mine would say, oh, you should just be a career coach, or you should just, charge people money for this. And I was like, really? Like, I didn't know you could charge people money for helping them start their business. And I noticed the one thing that started to bother me is I would have these like 3-hour coffee dates with people I barely knew and give them all this free advice. And then I would run into them like a year or two later, and they had done nothing with their business. And I was like, first of all, it was sad. And second, I was like, God, I just gave them all this, like I told them all the steps and they didn't get anywhere. So I said to myself, there was a point where I couldn't handle the amount of people asking me for help. And I said, next time someone asks me for help, I'm going to make them work with me for a few months, because, what's the point of a 3-hour coffee date if they're not going to get anywhere with it? So that's what actually happened. It was like my friend's little brother, who I'd never met before, asked me for help starting a business. And I was like, sure, here's the deal. You have to work with me for at least, I think it was like 3 or 4 months, and pay me monthly. And here's what we're going to do. And that's how I got my first client. And from there, I just, within a year, I started actually taking it very seriously, because I was already helping so many of my friends and really enjoying it. I just didn't know this was a thing. And then it just it started taking off from there. And all of a sudden I was like, wow, I either need to get serious with this, or like, get serious with my other business. So I was running 2 businesses at once for my first like couple years. Mostly because I didn't want to let go of the other business, but my passion was really aligned with the business coaching, and it was growing pretty quick. And my running apparel I was just actually getting really sick of it. I still run to this day, but, writing 2 blog posts a week about running for many years, and like doing social media about the same thing over and over, that, your passion, it didn't grow in the direction as, like my spiritual evolution grew. there was kind of a limit. So I realized, like this business coaching had so much more, around everything about me, because I started to realize it wasn't just about marketing and business. It was about this embodiment of living at a higher purpose. And so that's kind of how I fell into it. And, the rest is history.
Cool. I always love hearing entrepreneurial stories. And I think one of the points in your stories that I really want to point out is that your intuition had been speaking to you for a while. It had been like, hey, like this corporate thing is like not really for me. I actually am passionate about this other stuff, but it took things falling apart in your life in other areas and like kind of reaching that rock bottom to be like, yeah, I'm actually going to listen to that. And intuition is really interesting in that way, because people think, oh, if I follow my intuition, it should feel good. And when we're not listening to our intuition, it will speak to us in louder ways. And whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, we kind of get to those places where we're like, I literally can't do this anymore. I have to do something else. But that intuition still speaks to us. So I think that part of your story is really powerful and important. And also that like your passion evolved and changed. Like originally it was in running apparel, and that it's okay for it to evolve and change as you evolve and change. And as your spiritual journey evolves, there's going to be maybe like the essence of who you are and what you're here for is still the same, but the vehicle and the format of how you share that with the world may be different now and in 10 years from now.
Exactly. Totally. Exactly it.
Amazing. So I know that you do support others in really this piece around like following their purpose and turning their purpose into a business. And I'd love to hear more about, for someone who might feel stuck right now in that and feel stuck in their career, feel kind of lost in their career world, and want to have more purpose in their life and feel more fulfilled. Where would you start with that?
Yeah, so that's actually majority of my clients come to me with that initial like, hey, there's this thing I have been thinking about for many years, or I don't feel fulfilled, and I know I'm here for more. I know I have a bigger potential. And especially the last few years with everything happening on the planet, people are really feeling like, I want to contribute, I want to show up on a deeper level and not only have more fulfillment in my life, but also help others and create impact. So one of the first things I tell people, especially when they're feeling really stuck in fear, which of course is one of the biggest things that stops anybody from following their dreams, is to really shift your mindset around it. Like the one thing that I think made the difference when launching, actually, that, by the way, the running clothes was actually my second business. I launched an earlier one before then, but different story. But the one thing that really shifted was to change the mindset around it and call it a project. Meaning, like, I didn't actually quit my work. I still had consulting clients. I was still working with these tech companies. I didn't do anything that was like, 3D world dumb. Like, I knew I had to pay the bills, but I figured, I have nothing to lose by starting it and seeing what happens. It's not like I invested my life savings into it. And, most businesses do not actually take that much money or any money. Like what I teach and probably what Amy teaches, it costs $0 to start a business. So, I always say, look, start it as a project. Even if you have to shift your mindset and tell yourself it's nonprofit, or you're just going to start helping people, and see how it feels. That's where it's really important to start embodying it and really paying attention to the feelings that show up and all the signs from the universe. Like, and I'm sure Amy experiences this in her program, but very often, as soon as people make this commitment to get support to start this business or project, all of a sudden the signs start flowing in. Like people get text messages the next day, or someone asks, like, do you do coaching? Or, someone asked them to come and do a talk, whatever it is. I've had everything happen with my clients. And it's, to me, if you pay attention to what's happening, both inside your body, inside your heart, and really in the external of how things are showing up differently, if you start to notice those signs and actually allow them in, like that's the shift that you need to actually just keep going with it. For me, it's really interesting because I'm like, I have this history of the universe having to give me not only, like, I always notice the signs, and I have for pretty much my whole life, but I used to just ignore the signs. Like, even that, I knew, especially when so many of my friends were like, you should just do this for a living. I was like, and I knew there was something there, but I was like, nah, I just kept pushing it away. And the same thing with, I speak publicly about psychedelics in my business. And even that was another journey where it took a few years to finally be like, okay, I'll listen to you now. But I'm telling you, it's so much easier when you just pay attention and listen, and then take little baby steps. Like, it's not about, writing a book first thing, unless you're really called to write a book, but really just like one baby step at a time, which is where it's so important to get support, because I've now started 2 businesses without any support, and I'm telling you, it was so much harder, like extremely hard, which I know is, why that path was necessary, because I'm like, look, let me save you 2 years of trouble and, like, $10,000 of wasted money, so, but yeah, like the baby steps, they all add up, and it's very often, it doesn't really take that much, it just takes really listening to your intuition, listening to your heart, and, really doing the mindset practice. I love like daily meditation, visualization, chanting, anything you can do to help quiet that fear-based part of your mind, that is the part of your mind that will always stop you from living your dreams. And that's where, if you bring the awareness to your mind, that I always put it like these 2 ways of, there's the fear-based monkey mind over here, and then there's a higher self that's pulling you. And if you pay attention to that pull, and you just say, my boyfriend taught me this one, thank you, but no thank you, to the monkey mind, the pull is where the divine abundance is located. And that's where, if you just take the little baby steps towards the golden nuggets from the universe, like, things will start to shift.
Mm. I really love that advice, because, a lot of people, their mind automatically goes to like, this has to be the thing that supports me right now. And I have to take the leap right now. And, when you feel that pull, it does feel that way often. It's like, where I'm at right now doesn't feel good. It actually feels really terrible. And I want to do something that feels better, but I'm really afraid. I'm afraid of failing. I'm afraid it's not going to be safe and secure. I'm afraid of all of the things that could possibly happen, people judging me. And the problem is that when we don't take these baby steps first and get those little confirmation and signs from the universe, the ripping the Band-Aid off, taking the big leap is often too big of a fear for the ego to handle. It feels too unsafe. It's such a great, like, brings up that fight or flight nervous system of like, I'm not going to survive. And then people don't take any action at all. So the baby steps is really, I believe, where it is at to start. And I do love this idea of taking the pressure off of what it needs to be. And I know for some people that can be hard, especially if they are, don't have a corporate job or don't have income coming in. And even just that mindset in itself will free you up from the pressure that you're putting on your business, which comes from the ego and the fear-based mind as well. So I'm really loving this idea of like really feeling into each step along the way and allowing like the soul to guide you forward. And this is the difference between a spiritual business, a service-based business, a business that is designed to create impact in some way, and the businesses that I learned about in business school, which they solve a problem, and they're also designed specifically, they first focus on profit and then they focus on impact, really. Like, so I'd love to hear more about this concept of spiritual business and how that is, what that really means, and how one can really create and cultivate a spiritual business.
Yeah, I love what you said about business school. Yeah, I was in business school for about a month, and I was like, whoa, I quit this. Yeah, so I call it spiritual business. or I call myself a spiritual business coach because I really do believe that there is a part of all humans, and, not everybody maybe is here to quote, save the planet, but there's something inside of us that's beyond us, that's pulling us in a direction. And that maybe could be called purpose, or, a higher, the higher self way of living, or whatever it is. It actually really doesn't matter, the words, it's just language. But to really run your business and life, because it's all intertwined, it's not this separate thing that exists. It's you listening to what's inside of your heart, your soul, like something that's beyond you, that's pulling you in this direction that you want to go in. And also really bringing in your own values to your business. So, for me, it took me a few years to get comfortable with, like, I'm just going to share my astrology love and, my meditation practice and all this, like my day-to-day spiritual practices. It took a while to become comfortable sharing those within my business, but the more that you are able to share your full self and your fullest expression, the more it is spiritually aligned with who you are. And essentially, it's like, yeah, there's so many businesses that can just be all about, like, okay, let me, manipulate people's minds so that they buy more of our product, and, we, whatever, like sucker them into something, and then maybe they regret it later. Like, yeah, of course, there's tons of businesses that run like that. Like, this is what I kind of call, like, this is the old paradigm of life, that doesn't exist in my reality anymore. But like the old way of doing business was all bottom line, bottom line, bottom line. And I just believe, when I talk about this idea of conscious business as well, where there is a way to run a business, make tons of money, and align with everything that you value. Because the reality is, when you show up to your business with your, whether it's spiritual values or social activist values, or, anything you want to see change in the world, when you show up that way with your business, it becomes fully aligned with who you are. And then it attracts the right kind of people to work with you or buy your product or whatever it is. Like, even I know this is ridiculous, but I was buying a puffy coat recently because I'm going skiing in a few weeks. I need a new ski jacket, and I had a choice of two brands. Well, I actually had a choice of, the entire store. But I chose Patagonia, and I do buy a lot of Patagonia when it comes to sportswear, because I actually know very much about their values and how they do business, especially coming from someone who worked in the apparel industry. I know everything that goes on behind the scenes, and it's quite disturbing. But when you know that there's certain companies doing more value aligned work with, like, who you are, that even becomes things like, okay, who do I purchase from? This multi-million-dollar company or this multi-million-dollar company? Or work with this one coach or work with this other coach, and that's where it becomes actually very necessary. And I think, the way I believe this is essentially how we're going to create a better planet, in the long term, is really having more and more people who are awoke, or woken up to their own spiritual values, and also aligning their dollars and their time and their energy with other people who align with their values. And when there's more and more people who take all of this into account, whether it's a physical product or a person you're paying or a car you're buying or whatever it is, this is how we contribute to a better planet. Like, for those who believe that this is what it takes, is really, like, more sustainability and more value aligned products and services. So that's essentially what I, believe. I mean, there's so much more to it, of course, but essentially it's like being in your fullest expression, and, not being afraid of sharing your values and being who you are. I know it's not easy, but it's necessary.
Yeah. So important. Well, and then it doesn't feel fully aligned. Like, if you're having the behind the scenes, like, life, and then the on the screen life, or, and it's not all integrated, it can definitely feel off and not feel very good. And then the energetics of your business also will reflect that as well. So one of the things that I know that you're passionate about, and a lot of the people that you do attract into your space are also passionate about, is using psychedelics. And I'd love to hear about like your connection that you make with psychedelics in business and why this is such a passion of yours.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I started working with psychedelics actually at a very, very young age as a teenager. And I thought nothing of it. But I was always on a pretty deep spiritual path. I studied psychology in college, and my original intention was to become a therapist. And and I always loved neuroscience and this kind of understanding the potentials of the mind. And over many, many years of working with psychedelics, I got really deep into using psychedelics for spiritual growth, personal development, deep level healing, and like understanding myself on such a deeper level. And especially now with the amount of press that psychedelics has been getting around how it helps people with depression, anxiety, PTSD, there's also a lot of people like me who are talking about, well, there's also other benefits. Really, it helps us see things in a different light. It helps us understand ourselves and really drop into our heart and really be present with what is on a different level. It's the expansion of the mind and shifting of the consciousness, and really being able to change our perspective and our programming that hasn't really served most of humanity or the earth, and really starting to have, like, I know these words can be heavy, but like this awakened experience of, oh, life can be different. The world can be different. The earth can eventually come into balance with all the humans. And so many, many years ago, I had been working very deeply with kind of more the powerful psychedelics, as if they aren't at all. I was like, well, all of them are pretty powerful, but I've been working with ayahuasca for about 7 or 8 years now, like pretty intensely, going down to Peru for many years, like doing these long-term, they call them dietas, and psilocybin and some other things. And really what I started to notice was, even within myself, the shift in my, like my old business, my new business, within my new business, and realizing that this work, along with proper integration, by the way, that's also very important, but the daily practice, meditation, mindfulness, somatic therapy, movement, like, working with coaches, I could go on and on. But what I started to notice is how it was actually helping me shift into my deeper level purpose, like over and over and over and over. Meaning, even though I always knew what my purpose was since I was a kid, it's like getting more and more refined. I also had noticed very early on in business coaching, I was like randomly attracting other medicine people. I wasn't even trying either. I just, the first time it really hit me was I got a client who lived in Australia, and I was like, how did she know? So, but in our work together, I remember, because she also worked with ayahuasca, I remember feeling, wow, this is really great to be able to talk very openly to, to her, and then for her to be able to share with me. And I realized one of the biggest issues out there at the time, I mean, this was again many years ago, people didn't have a person to talk to. They didn't have a business coach who also understood psychedelics, because these ceremonies and these powerful experiences can really have a profound effect on your life. And not always in the positive way either. They can also go very like, oh my God, it just told me to change my entire business or quit my job tomorrow, the extremes. And if you don't have the integration and the support, they can actually go in kind of not the most positive direction. And what I started seeing even within my own community is people would go, go away to Peru for 2 weeks and do these, like this experience you do in Peru is extremely powerful. It's very life-changing. But I would see people like kind of fall off the earth or go off the deep end or quit everything and then go play a guitar on a mountain until they ran out of money. And I mean, I'm not making this up, like they would run out of money and be like, oh, maybe I should figure out what I want to do now. And I kept saying, hey, you guys, like, what's the point of doing this deep work if you're not going to be able to eventually bring it back to not only your reality, but like the world. It's like, it's not just for you. I mean, yes, it's for you and your healing and that process, but then it eventually reaches a point where there's something beyond you, where a lot of people are feeling called to serve and give back and create change and do business different and do things different in their life. And for years, I was actually, again, this is super cliche. I like roll my eyes when I say this, but very often in these medicine ceremonies, it was showing me and telling me, like, you need to talk about this. Like, you need to talk about this interconnection between people on the psychedelic path and coming into your purpose, coming into your heart, realizing that your life is misaligned in some way. And, because I kept seeing it over and over with my clients, with my friends, with, other communities. And I was like, oh, I can't talk about that. Like, ooh, this is too taboo. Of course, this was years ago before it became like, totally shifting policies in the election this year. So I started, just like Amy was talking about, the intuition. I started kind of just getting curious with it. Like, and, my first idea was like, ooh, it'd be really cool to do a summit on this and interview people to talk about the subject, and like, maybe do a whole program and this and that. And so when I first did my first summit about this a few years ago, I actually was like, no one's gonna be interested in this. Like, I actually was like, I have to do this. It was that same thing. I had to do it for my own soul, because it kept telling me to do this for years. I kept getting excited when I thought about it. I was scared as hell to do it. Don't get me wrong. I was like, oh, this is crazy. Like, I actually thought people were going to come and like arrest me at my door, or like the FBI would be following me, or whatever it was. But I knew I had to try it. And I'm very much one of these people, when I do something, I'm either all or nothing. So I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm just going to go kind of big and see what happens. So I just called it like psychedelics, sacred medicines, and purpose. Like, blatantly, I'm not going to hide the words, because previously I was hiding the words in my emails and my blog posts. I would talk about like going to Peru, but I wouldn't say what it was, even though people could kind of figure it out. So, but what's interesting over the last few years, what I realized is there was a whole group of people, like pretty big group of people out there, who are like, yes, I've thought of exactly the same thing you're talking about. And this is something that needs to be discussed, because psychedelics are not only for people with PTSD or depression, they're for everybody. I mean, not saying everybody should do them, but there are very healthy people out there working with them, but still need help with, like integration or making changes in their life. So, and then additionally, there's also this new kind of growing market of psychedelic integration coaching, which, I had seen that there were these training programs out there, and I was like, but no one's going to figure out how to grow a business, because it's a new concept for most people. And it's hard when you're at the very early adopter stage. It's like growing any kind of tech startup. You really have to hone in on understanding who your ideal clients are and what exactly they need, because just calling yourself a psychedelic integration coach does not guarantee clients. And if anything, because I was one of these people, I was like, most of the people I know who work with psychedelics, they don't think they even need help. They think they're fine, even if they're not. So you have to learn how to speak to them. So this is where everything's kind of come together, where a lot of my clients are integrating psychedelics into their coaching, or doing psychedelic integration, or people doing like death, end of life stuff, or death doula work, with also combining psychedelics. I've had some therapists who are starting to shift, like add this, because there's a demand. There's such a high demand right now for people who are like, I've tried everything and I keep hearing about the benefits. Who do I turn to? So I do have a lot of clients who are not just like, oh, they're not just doing psychedelics and like running mushroom circles or something. They're helping people who are on this path as well. So that's kind of like how it's happened. And I do believe that this conversation is going to get more and more important as the laws are now changing, and there's more and more psychedelic centers going in. MAPS, who's like the leader in all of this, is, their business plan for the future is huge. Like, and they have a gigantic team and money, and they're, they plan on expanding and creating these psychedelic therapy type centers. And they even said, like, because it's not the psychedelics, it's so much more. It's going to take, people like Amy to help them with confidence and embodiment. And, it's so much more than just having the psychedelic journey. It's becomes all of life. And that's where there's going to be, coaches and healers and sound healers, yoga teachers, everything. So it's been an interesting ride, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I've been super curious about learning the integration and how you're, even describing the connection, and it feels so clear to me. And I think one of the biggest things with a lot of the spiritual practices is that a lot of people can end up living in what we call like the 5D and not really take all of the, whether it could be through psychedelics or it could be through their spiritual practices, and living in this spiritual world, but not really integrating it into the real world, into the real life. And that's where we can, really make a difference in the planet, in helping other people. Like, we can't do that when we're up on top of a mountain playing guitar, right? Or, constantly going back to the jungle in Peru to do medicine journeys and not actually bringing that back and integrating it. So
Totally.
I mean, it makes sense that as consciousness is rising, the collective consciousness is rising, that this conversation is going to get louder, and also as a modality for healing things like modern day very common mental health issues, anxiety, depression, PTSD. They're not being handled in an appropriate way in Western culture. And so it makes sense that there are some ancient medicines and wisdoms that are now starting to be integrated. And, before we hopped on, you're like, I like talking about psychedelics, and like, are you cool with that? And I am, because it's a conversation that, it's not something that's a huge part of my life. It is something that I'm interested in and also have experimented with. And also I think that the conversation is clearly coming to light. And I know that there are people who resonate. And I think most importantly, why I wanted you to share it is to show that, like, when you follow your passion and when you share unapologetically and when you let all parts of yourself be seen, especially the scariest ones where you're like, nope, can't talk about that part of my life, you're really blocking a part of your expression. And when you fully allow yourself to be expressed, whether it is about sexuality, whether it's about psychedelics, about money, about whatever it is that you feel is shameful to share about or you're scared to share about, that's where the freedom is. And it's also where you're going to attract and magnetize the right people into your business and into your life. So that's something that I really wanted to just kind of wrap the bow on in that conversation, was like, it is so important. And as you were speaking, I could tell, like, look how much this lights you up. Like, this is something that's really important. And there's other people who feel that way too.
Exactly. I love what you said about the 5D, because it totally goes hand in hand. I mean, I get clients where I'm like, okay, it's great that you're living in the 5D, but we're still trying to affect the 3D. There's work to be done here on Earth right now. And that's where they need people like us to help bring them back into, into their bodies, into themselves, and actually bring it out there to the world. So I agree. It's like, there's no point to doing all this just so you can escape and be living on another planet. It doesn't really serve you. It doesn't really serve anyone else either.
Well, I'm super excited that here we are, beginning of 2021, talking about psychedelics on the Feminine Frequency podcast. Who else knows what's going to happen this year? But I'm really grateful to have you here sharing your wisdom and your gifts. And I'd love for you to share where my community can find you. Where can they continue connecting with you and learning from you? What's the best place?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So I can be found pretty much all over the internet at BethAWeinstein.com. I'm Beth A. Weinstein on Instagram. I'm connected to Amy on all the social media, Facebook, Beth Weinstein. I also have a psychedelics Facebook group if anyone's interested. I have a couple psychedelic summits that I've done that are still kind of live out there. Part of them are and they're free. But yeah, I'm around. Please reach out. And, if you're curious, especially, I say this is part of the whole movement too, is really just to have an open mind, and just to get curious about it. It doesn't, again, like, not all my clients do psychedelics and not everybody in my community does either, but to be open-minded to these shifts that we're seeing, in society and on the planet in all different realms, the spiritual realm, mindfulness work, somatic work, it's all interconnected, and this is the times that we're in, so it's definitely good to be at least educated and open to a new way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, before we hop off, I just really want to speak into, with psychedelics, I've seen people, even in the way that you're talking about it, I feel a deep embodiment and groundedness around it. Sometimes it can be very like, yeah, just in a totally different energetic space. And so I really appreciate you bringing the conversation from a neutral space and then allowing people who are curious to to continue to explore more for themselves. So thank you for being here. Thank you everyone for listening. You can find all of Beth's info in the show notes from today, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.
Thank you.
Thanks.